The USS Greyhound pitched violently against the swelling Pacific waves, rain lashing across the deck like 1,000 needles. Thunder rumbled overhead, shaking the steel bulkheads, while lightning illuminated the vast gray horizon in jagged flashes. The crew struggled to maintain footing, gripping rails and ropes, their uniforms soaked through, eyes wide with tension. But no one's fear matched what was about to unfold. Captain Marcus Doyle moved with predatory precision across the slick metal surface. His face was a storm in itself. Tight jaw, narrowed eyes, and a quiet rage that seemed ready to erupt at any second. He had always been respected by the crew, but respect had long since grown tangled with fear. And now, his fear was facing him in the form of Lieutenant Commander. Elena stood near the bow, the wind whipping her hair and the rain streaming down her face. Her trident pin gleamed faintly in the intermittent lightning flashes. She wasn't trembling, though her body strained to keep balance against the surging deck. Every muscle in her body was coiled and ready, like a spring, as if she knew this moment would decide everything. Doyle's steps were deliberate, each one echoing ominously. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he raised the shotgun and pressed it firmly against her temple. The metal was cold against her skin, and for a split second, Elena could hear her own heartbeat, loud and steady. The crew froze. Officers and enlisted alike held their breath, some gripping railings, others gripping the edges of control panels. No one dared intervene. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing in Doyle's mind. The shotgun was his declaration of power, his weapon of intimidation, and he expected it to work. Elena tilted her chin slightly, her eyes locked on his. Her lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. "You sure you want to pull that trigger, Captain?" she asked, her voice calm, unwavering. Not a quiver, not a tremor, not the slightest sign of fear. Her words carried weight, measured and precise. Doyle's hand shook imperceptibly, the barrel pressing harder against her skin. He wasn't used to disobedience, especially not from someone like Elena, a female SEAL, someone he had underestimated from day one. And now, standing before him, unflinching, she was challenging his authority, his ego, his very sense of control. Rage collided with panic inside him, and the crew could see it reflected in his eyes. The realization that he had made a mistake, a grave one. Lightning struck close, casting eerie shadows across the deck. The wind tore at Elena's jacket, whipping her hair into her face, but she didn't move. She held her stance like a warrior, trained to endure pain, trained to face death, trained to survive the impossible. Years of preparation, of brutal training in freezing surf, of sleepless nights in inhospitable terrain, had brought her to this moment. This was her crucible. Doyle's mind raced. The threats he had issued over months, the punishments, the public humiliations, none had shaken her. None had broken her. And now, with the crew watching, she was more formidable than ever. In his heart, a quiet, terrifying realization took root. He could not intimidate her. He could not control her. The crew shifted uneasily. Some swallowed hard, others clutched each other's shoulders, their eyes darting between the captain and the lieutenant commander. It was a tense tableau, frozen in time by fear, adrenaline, and rain. No one dared speak, for fear of tipping the balance in favor of death. Elena took a slow, deliberate breath, and the storm outside seemed to pause for a fraction of a second. "You're not a captain right now," she said, her voice steady, almost serene. "You're just a man who forgot what fear is." Her words cut through Doyle's mind, a jolt sharper than any bolt of lightning. Fear. That was the one thing he thought he had mastered. And now, faced with her calmness in the eye of his fury, he realized he had underestimated her completely. Every order he had barked, every threat he had made, she had anticipated it, deflected it, and survived. The shotgun wavered in his grip. A bead of sweat or perhaps the rain trickled down his temple. The metal barrel pressed harder against her skin, but for once, Doyle hesitated. He had trained men to obey, drilled fear into soldiers' hearts, but Elena Ward was not like other soldiers. She was a storm of her own, trained to strike, trained to endure, trained to survive against odds that would break ordinary men. Elena didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked onto his, reading the subtle shifts in his posture, his tension, the slight tremor of his grip. She had faced death before, underwater in freezing conditions, in enemy territory, with nothing but her wits and training to survive. Death had no power over her now. It was merely an obstacle, like any other challenge she had conquered. The wind screamed across the deck, the waves crashed like armies against the hull, and the crew's fear hung thick in the air. Doyle's mind spun, a whirlpool of anger, disbelief, and a dawning sense of terror. For the first time, he realized that raw aggression would not win. Authority alone could not conquer this woman. She had mastered something he had not: composure, patience, and precision under pressure. And then, almost imperceptibly, Elena shifted her weight. Her posture relaxed but ready, signaling the first true act of defiance. She was unafraid of him, unafraid of the weapon, unafraid of the storm around them. She was calm, collected, a predator in human form. Doyle's heart pounded in his chest as reality hit him. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten a lesson drilled into every SEAL recruit: never threaten someone trained to endure fear. And now, he was about to pay for it. The crew exhaled collectively as the tension seemed to hang in the air, suspended like the thunder above. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. In that brief silence, the storm outside and the storm within Doyle collided. And in that split second, it became clear to everyone aboard the Greyhound that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Elena's faint smile remained, unwavering, as if daring him to act. Doyle's hand faltered. The crew watched, hearts hammering, breaths caught in throats, knowing this moment would be remembered long after the waves calmed and the storm passed. And then she spoke again, soft but firm. "You're not the first man to think he could break me, and you won't be the last." Doyle froze. The weight of the shotgun suddenly felt heavier in his hands. The words hit him harder than any reprimand, harder than any storm. He realized, fully, that threatening a Navy SEAL, especially one like Elena Ward, was not only foolish, it was dangerous. Lightning struck once more, illuminating the deck, and in that flash, the world seemed to shift. The captain was no longer the one in control. The lieutenant commander had claimed the upper hand, silently, effortlessly, without lifting a finger to harm anyone. The USS Greyhound continued to rock in the storm, but on deck, a new force had emerged. Calm, collected, unyielding, and utterly unbroken. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward had faced death, and in doing so, had ensured that no one, not even a captain, would ever underestimate her again. The storm was far from over, but for the first time that night, the crew felt a strange clarity. Survival wasn't about rank. It wasn't about rage. It was about courage, skill, and the unflinching calm of a warrior who had nothing to fear. And in that moment, everyone knew this was only the beginning. Elena Ward grew up in a small, weathered town on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, where the roads were cracked and opportunity seemed as scarce as rain in the summer. Her father, a retired Marine, ran a modest auto repair shop, teaching Elena the value of hard work with grease-stained hands and long, quiet lessons about discipline. He told her often, "Courage isn't loud. It's showing up when everyone else walks away." Those words echoed in her mind, shaping the woman she would become. From a young age, Elena learned that the world would underestimate her, and she learned to use that underestimation as fuel. She was smaller than most boys her age, her frame wiry and agile, but she had a fire that burned far brighter than any of their brawn. Bullies tested her relentlessly, mocking her for wanting to follow in her father's footsteps. She fought back, not with blind fury, but with strategy. Quick hands, precise movements, and a mind that never paused for fear gave her victory again and again. School wasn't any easier. Teachers doubted her abilities. Peers dismissed her ambitions, and the world seemed to whisper, "This isn't your place." But Elena never whispered back, she acted. While other kids wasted hours on distractions, she honed her skills. She ran until her lungs burned, lifted until her muscles trembled, and practiced swimming in the cold river behind her house until the chill felt like nothing. Every hardship was a test, every obstacle a challenge to overcome. At 17, she joined her father at the auto shop for the summer. Most teenagers her age would have complained, but Elena embraced it. She rebuilt engines, welded steel, and learned patience under the hood. Every job had a problem to solve. Every problem demanded focus, and every solved problem gave her confidence. By the end of that summer, she wasn't just strong, she was unbreakable. When she announced to her family that she wanted to become a Navy SEAL, disbelief flooded the room. "Girls don't do that, Elena," her older brother said, shaking his head. Her mother tried to soften it with concern. "It's dangerous, honey." "Are you sure?" Elena didn't answer with words. She answered with determination, showing up to the recruiter's office every day, refusing to be dismissed. The first hurdle was Bud's basic underwater demolition SEAL training. It was infamous for breaking the strongest minds and bodies, and it had never accepted a woman in her unit before. On the first day, instructors looked her up and down, eyebrows raised, expecting her to quit before the week ended. Instead, she smiled quietly and plunged into the freezing surf, feeling the icy Atlantic bite her skin, every nerve screaming to retreat. The instructors threw every obstacle at her. Endless runs, log carries across beaches, timed swims in near-freezing water, sleep deprivation, and mental games designed to crush confidence. Many men quit. Some broke down crying. Elena did not. Each challenge fueled her. Her body ached, her hands were raw, and her lungs burned, but she pushed forward, step by step, stroke by stroke. When waves crashed over her and the wind howled, she smiled, remembering her father's words. "Courage isn't loud, it's showing up." Months passed. Exhaustion became normal. Pain became familiar. Failure wasn't an option. She endured Hell Week, arguably the toughest test in Bud's, where recruits faced sleep deprivation, extreme physical exertion, and constant psychological pressure. She worked beside men who had trained their entire lives for this, and yet she kept pace, never wavering, never complaining. When others collapsed, she lifted them. When leaders faltered, she guided them. By the end, she was not only surviving, she was excelling. Earning the Trident pin was the culmination of every hardship, every moment of self-doubt she had ever felt. When the pin was pinned to her chest, she whispered to herself, "They'll remember me now." Not just for surviving, but for becoming something others doubted she could ever be. She had proved that the impossible could be achieved, and that courage, intelligence, and endurance could outweigh brute strength. Even as a newly minted SEAL, Elena faced skepticism. Many male operators resented the idea of taking orders from a woman who had been through what she had. Some tried to test her, questioning her decisions during training exercises, attempting to expose weaknesses that didn't exist. But Elena remained calm, confident, and methodical. She learned to read people quickly, anticipate moves before they were made, and assert herself without anger. Her reputation grew quietly, steadily, like a shadow moving through the ranks. Her first deployment tested her in ways training never could. She faced ambushes, improvised explosive devices, hostile terrain, and the constant pressure of saving lives under fire. She watched comrades fall, felt the sting of loss, and endured the weight of command decisions that could mean life or death. Each mission honed her instincts. Each challenge forged her mental armor. By the time she returned to the USS Greyhound, Elena was more than a SEAL. She was a force of nature, a woman who had faced the worst of humanity and emerged undefeated. When Captain Doyle arrived on the ship, Elena had already earned respect quietly, though not without challenges. He was a man who had always valued authority above all, with a temper prone to explosion and an ego that could crush anyone in its path. From their first encounter, he underestimated her, assuming that her youth, her gender, and her calm demeanor meant weakness. He could not have been more wrong. Elena watched him closely, studying his habits, his moods, his triggers. She understood how he operated, how fear and pride could be manipulated, and when necessary, confronted. She had survived Hell Week, ambushes, hostile territory, and missions where failure meant death. Nothing Doyle could throw at her would break her unless she allowed it, and she never would. Her training wasn't just physical. It was mental, spiritual, and tactical. She had mastered the art of patience under pressure, the precision of calculation in chaos, and the unflinching control of fear. Every scar, bruise, and sleepless night was a testament to her endurance. She had been tempered by adversity and emerged sharper, stronger, and wiser. As the Greyhound cut through the ocean waves and storms raged outside, Elena Ward was ready. She knew the captain's temper, understood his threats, and anticipated his worst. And though the crew trembled, unsure of what the confrontation would bring, Elena stood calm and resolute, prepared to face the impossible once again. In the storm's eye, both literally and metaphorically, she was the one who held the power of the SEAL, who had survived everything, and who would survive anything. And when the moment came, when the shotgun pressed against her head, it would not be her fear that mattered. It would be her courage, her skill, and her unwavering resolve that decided the outcome. The sun had barely risen over the Syrian desert when Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward and her SEAL team disembarked from the Black Hawk helicopter. The engine's roar swallowed by the vast emptiness of sand and ruin. Dust stung their eyes, and the heat pressed down on them like a weight. But Elena moved with the calm focus of someone who had faced worse. This mission rescue hostages trapped in a remote compound was supposed to be routine. But in war, routine was a dangerous illusion. Captain Marcus Doyle had issued the orders over the radio hours earlier, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the static with authority that demanded obedience. "Approach from the north," he barked. "Suppress any resistance. No deviations." He had not been in the field for years. His knowledge of local terrain was outdated. He relied on his authority to control events he did not fully understand. Elena's team had trained for this, running simulations of countless variations of hostile environments. She had scanned satellite images, studied the terrain, calculated the most likely ambush points. Doyle's plan, however, ignored the data. It risked her team's lives unnecessarily. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before making the decision that would forever mark her career. "Team, I just approached route east flank," she whispered into her comms, barely audible over the rotor wash. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Harris, glanced at her, questioning but trusting. Elena's voice was calm, precise, carrying the authority of someone who had earned it in blood and sweat. They veered off Doyle's prescribed path, moving with stealth and efficiency. The east flank led them to a narrow canyon, where enemy forces had hidden in the shadows. Gunfire erupted immediately, and the SEALs responded instinctively, returning fire, taking cover, and advancing toward the compound. Elena's calculations were correct. The alternate route minimized casualties. But the firefight was brutal. Sand kicked up in their faces, bullets ricocheted off stone walls, and the screams of trapped hostages echoed through the canyons. Doyle's voice crackled over the radio, filled with fury. "Ward, I told you to follow orders. What are you doing?" His anger was palpable, but Elena knew better than to respond with fear. "We're saving lives, Captain," she replied firmly. "We're in position." Orders adjusted for real-time conditions. 2 of her men were hit during the engagement. Pain flared through Elena's chest, not from fear, but from frustration at the cost of following a man's pride over logic. She moved with precision, dragging one soldier behind cover, applying first aid, and coordinating suppression fire. She could feel Doyle's outrage radiating through the comms, his pride wounded because a subordinate had the audacity to defy him. Minutes stretched like hours. The SEALs advanced, neutralizing threats one by one. The hostages huddled, terrified, until Elena and her team reached them, guiding them to safety with calm reassurance. By the time the helicopters arrived to extract them, 12 hostages were alive, thanks to her foresight and quick decision-making. But the cost was steep. 2 SEALs lay injured, their injuries a direct result of ignoring Doyle's orders. In the debrief, Doyle's fury boiled over. He berated Elena in front of her team, accusing her of insubordination, of putting lives at risk, of undermining his authority. He spoke with venom, expecting fear, obedience, or at least shame. Elena listened quietly, her expression unchanging. Inside, a storm brewed not of anger, but of clarity. She had saved lives where blind obedience might have cost them all. She had made the difficult choice, weighed the odds, and acted with precision. Doyle's authority meant nothing when it endangered the very people they had sworn to protect. The higher command, aware of the mission's outcome, commended Elena quietly. The 12 rescued hostages were alive because of her decisions, her courage, and her ability to think under fire. But Doyle saw only humiliation. To him, a woman and officer he considered subordinate had publicly defied him, saving lives while proving him wrong. His pride had been shattered. From that moment, the tension between them simmered. Doyle did not forget the sting of being contradicted, of having his judgment questioned. He began to view Elena not as a capable leader, but as a threat, someone who challenged his control, someone who undermined the hierarchy he valued above all else. Elena, on the other hand, understood the danger. She knew Doyle's temper, his insecurities, and his capacity for retaliation. She anticipated that he might test her again, push her boundaries, or attempt to intimidate her with authority alone. She prepared mentally, knowing that her survival depended not only on physical skill, but on reading human behavior, predicting moves, and acting with precision. Her team sensed the tension as well. They respected her, trusted her judgment, and saw the difference between leadership through fear and leadership through competence. They had followed her through fire and chaos, knowing she made decisions that kept them alive. And though Doyle's presence loomed over them like a storm cloud, Elena's calm confidence steadied their nerves. Returning to the USS Greyhound, the aftershocks of the mission lingered. Crew members whispered about the operation, the saved hostages, and the decisions Elena had made. Some feared Doyle's wrath, others admired her courage. In private, Doyle raged, pacing the deck late into the night, nursing his wounded pride. He plotted, unconsciously setting the stage for the confrontation that would eventually bring him face to face with Elena on the deck of the ship, shotgun in hand. But Elena's mind was already forward-looking. She debriefed her team meticulously, reviewed the mission's successes and failures, and ensured that every lesson was logged. She documented every decision, every calculation, every move she had made, knowing that record-keeping was part of her survival strategy. Knowledge was power, and she wielded it with the precision of a weapon. In the quiet moments after the storm of battle, she reflected on what had happened. Leadership was not about fear or domination. It was about responsibility, judgment, and courage under pressure. Doyle's failure was not merely his arrogance. It was a reminder that authority alone could not substitute for competence. And while Doyle seethed, plotting how to regain control, Elena focused on what mattered: the lives saved, the trust of her team, and the unbroken code she lived by. She knew that the confrontation on the deck would come, and she would be ready not just to survive, but to assert the truth of her strength in a world that often underestimated her. By the time the crew of the Greyhound retired to their bunks, the tension in the air was palpable. The seeds of conflict had been sown, and no one aboard could ignore the brewing storm between the captain and the SEAL who had defied him. Elena Ward, standing quietly on the deck, knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had made the impossible possible once before, and she was prepared to do it again, no matter the cost. The countdown to confrontation had begun. The USS Greyhound hummed quietly under the moonless night, waves rocking the vessel in a rhythm both soothing and deceptive. On deck, the storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie calm. But beneath the surface, tension throbbed like a heartbeat through the steel corridors. Captain Marcus Doyle moved with a rigid precision, his temper simmering in private, while the crew navigated the delicate balance between loyalty and fear. Elena Ward, however, saw more than the visible tension. Her instincts, honed through years of battlefield experience, sensed the undercurrents, the subtle signs of corruption, the cracks in the chain of command. Rumors had started months ago: missing supplies, unaccounted for weapon shipments, unexplained night excursions. Small inconsistencies at first, easily dismissed by those loyal to Doyle, but Elena noticed. She had been watching quietly, documenting patterns, tracing movements, recording anomalies with meticulous precision. Every report she filed, every log she cross-referenced, painted a picture of a captain whose authority masked recklessness and worse, corruption. The crew feared Doyle, yes, but Elena realized that fear alone could not account for the unusual lapses in judgment, the discrepancies in mission reports, and the subtle hints of illicit activity. In the ship's maintenance bay, she moved silently, a shadow among shadows. Her laptop flickered with encrypted files, carefully hidden in routine engineering logs. She downloaded communications, cross-checked inventory records, and tagged anomalies for further review. Every keystroke was deliberate, every movement calculated to avoid detection. In her mind, a strategy formed, not to attack, but to protect the crew, to ensure the truth would surface when the time was right. Doyle, oblivious to her nocturnal activity, paced his cabin in the officers' quarters. His paranoia had been growing for months. The Syrian mission had left a scar not just on his pride, but on his perception of control. He suspected insubordination at every corner, though he had no evidence yet of Elena's meticulous surveillance. And the more he tried to assert dominance, the more he revealed cracks in his leadership. Elena anticipated this. She knew Doyle's triggers: threats to his pride, challenges to his authority, evidence that contradicted his narrative. Every move he made could be countered if approached with patience and strategy. Unlike the battlefield, where immediacy dictated survival, this war required subtlety, observation, and timing. She was not merely a soldier. She was a tactician. Through the ship's labyrinthine passages, she moved as though invisible. Crew members recognized her presence, but few questioned it. She exuded a calm authority born of experience. Whispers followed her, some admiring, some envious, but she ignored them. Every step was purposeful, every action deliberate. She was building an invisible network of evidence that would someday confront Doyle in a way words could not. Meanwhile, Doyle's behavior became increasingly erratic. Orders were given without clarity, punishments handed down arbitrarily, and minor infractions magnified into threats of severe discipline. Crew members began speaking in hushed tones about missing weapons and unreported supplies. Some speculated quietly, too fearful to confront the captain directly. Elena, however, began connecting the dots. Each small discrepancy told a story of a man whose pride was outweighing his responsibility, and whose recklessness endangered everyone aboard. Elena had learned the power of patience through years of high-stakes operations. She understood that a single misstep, a poorly timed confrontation, could cost lives. She could have exposed Doyle immediately, but she waited, gathering incontrovertible evidence. She knew the confrontation would come, and she wanted the scales tipped decisively. Every night she worked in silence, crafting a digital paper trail, encrypting sensitive files, and ensuring that the truth could not be dismissed or destroyed. By the end of the week, she had amassed enough evidence to draw a clear picture. Missing ammunition, misreported mission logistics, and illicit communications with shadowy figures that hinted at arms diversion. This wasn't just incompetence, this was betrayal of duty. A violation of every principle she had sworn to uphold as a Navy SEAL. Doyle, sensing the crew's unease, but unable to pinpoint the cause, grew increasingly volatile. He demanded loyalty without question, obedience without hesitation. The slightest hesitation from the crew earned glares, reprimands, and occasionally threats. Yet Elena remained composed, a quiet anchor in the sea of fear and uncertainty. Her presence reminded the crew that competence and courage could coexist with restraint, even in the presence of terror. On the deck during the late hours, Elena observed Doyle from a distance as he barked orders at a junior officer. His movements were precise, his voice commanding, but his face betrayed a subtle uncertainty. He sensed, without admitting it, that his control was slipping. He had underestimated the awareness and intelligence of his crew, and most of all, he had underestimated Elena. She had long ago learned to read body language, to anticipate reactions, and to use silence as a weapon. The crew watched and mirrored her confidence, understanding instinctively that her calm wasn't fear, it was mastery. In private moments, some officers admitted they would not have survived her field decisions had they been left to Doyle's impulsive judgment. Elena's methodical nature contrasted sharply with Doyle's volatility, and the disparity only grew with time. Every night, the ship became a chessboard, and Elena's moves were precise. She avoided direct confrontation, choosing instead to gather allies quietly, protect the vulnerable, and compile a dossier that would ultimately secure justice. Doyle, unknowingly, walked into a trap of his own making, a leader blinded by pride, whose decisions endangered the very people he claimed to protect. The tension escalated subtly but unmistakably. Crew members whispered of Doyle's disappearing temper, his reckless orders, and the strange discrepancies in logistics reports. Elena quietly reinforced morale where she could, encouraging teamwork and vigilance, always careful not to expose her full hand. She was aware that one wrong move could jeopardize not only the mission, but the lives of everyone aboard. As the days passed, the storm outside mirrored the storm within the Greyhound. Rain and wind had long ceased, but the undercurrent of anxiety remained, palpable among the crew. Elena's meticulous observations and encrypted files were poised to expose the truth. Every interaction, every anomaly, every whispered rumor would soon converge into a single undeniable revelation. Doyle summoned her to his quarters under the pretense of discussing routine operations. The crew sensed the tension immediately. They knew something was coming, though none could predict the exact nature of the confrontation. Elena walked calmly, each step measured, her mind rehearsing every possible scenario. She had faced life-or-death situations before, yet the threat from Doyle carried a unique danger, unpredictable authority fused with personal vendetta. That night, the deck of the Greyhound would become the arena where all the silent battles of the past months erupted into a confrontation that would leave no room for ambiguity. Doyle, armed with fear and ego, would come face to face with Elena's unflinching courage. And when he did, he would learn the most important lesson of his life. You never, ever threaten a Navy SEAL. Every detail was in place. The storm outside, the tension within, the crew watching silently, and Elena Ward standing firm, ready for whatever came next. She knew her preparation, her patience, and her courage would determine the outcome. And in that quiet, electric moment, the stage was set for the inevitable collision of pride and principle, ego and expertise, fear and fearless resolve. The night air aboard the USS Greyhound was thick with tension, as though the ship itself anticipated the impending confrontation. The storm had passed days ago, leaving the deck slick with residual rain and sea spray, yet the atmosphere was charged, as if lightning still crackled invisibly overhead. Crew members moved silently, eyes darting nervously between the captain and Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward. Every hand clutched railings or weapons, aware that this moment would decide more than just pride. It could decide lives. Captain Marcus Doyle had summoned Elena to the bow under the guise of disciplinary review. The crew, scattered along the deck, watched from shadows and corners, knowing that authority and fear were about to collide. Doyle's steps were measured but tense, each one echoing ominously against the metal floor. In his grip was the shotgun, polished and ominous, a tool meant to enforce obedience. Elena approached calmly. Her boots struck the deck lightly, deliberately, each step a silent declaration that she was unafraid. Her eyes locked onto Doyle's, reading the subtle tremor in his hand, the tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible twitch of his left eye. She had studied him, anticipated this moment, yet nothing could erase the rush of adrenaline that surged through every fiber of her being. "Captain," she said, voice steady, resonant, "you called me here." "I'm listening." Doyle's lips curled into a snarl, and in one swift motion, he pressed the shotgun against her temple. Cold metal met skin, and for a split second, the world seemed to slow. Rain from earlier storms still clung to her hair, glinting in the moonlight. The crew froze, breaths caught in their throats. Fear was visible in their eyes, but Elena's gaze did not waver. She did not flinch. "You've ruined me," Doyle spat, his voice a mix of fury and desperation. "Do you understand what you've done?" Elena's calm was deliberate, a weapon sharper than any rifle. "You've already ruined yourself, Captain," she replied softly, almost serene. "Your fear, your arrogance. It's obvious to everyone aboard. You don't control anything here, not anymore." Doyle's finger twitched near the trigger, and the air grew taut with imminent danger. Crew members instinctively shifted, ready to intervene, yet instinct and training held them back. They had all witnessed Elena in action. Her precision, her decisiveness, her ability to survive impossible scenarios. No one doubted her capability, even now, when a shotgun rested against her temple. Then, in a movement so precise it seemed preordained, Elena acted. Her body shifted, pivoting in a fluid motion, disarming Doyle with the speed of a practiced warrior. The shotgun clattered across the deck, its metallic ring echoing through the night. Doyle stumbled back, stunned. For the first time in his life, he realized that authority and intimidation alone could not overcome skill and courage. The crew exhaled collectively, tension leaking out of their bodies, though still wary. Elena stepped back, calm, poised, her trident gleaming faintly in the dim light. She didn't strike, didn't raise her own weapon. Her dominance was silent but absolute. "You just threatened a Navy SEAL," she said, voice firm yet measured. "And you learned, perhaps too late, that this isn't a mistake you can recover from." Doyle's face went pale. Rage gave way to disbelief, then fear anew, an unfamiliar sensation. He had underestimated her, assumed her composure would crumble, assumed rank and fear alone could enforce obedience. He had been wrong. Every threat, every display of power had been met with unyielding calm, unbroken courage. And now, standing disarmed, he confronted the reality of his own vulnerability. Elena's team closed ranks around her, silent and disciplined. No words were exchanged, no additional commands issued. Their presence reinforced her authority, not through intimidation, but through loyalty earned in battle and mutual respect. Each operator understood that Elena's strength had protected them countless times, and that this confrontation was as much a lesson for Doyle as it was a reaffirmation of their trust in her leadership. Doyle struggled to regain composure, his ego bruised beyond measure. "You'll pay for this," he muttered, trying to reclaim control through threats alone. But Elena's eyes did not waver. "Not today," she replied simply. "Not ever." The night seemed suspended around them. Waves crashed against the hull, wind whispered across the deck, and above it all, the tension crackled like a live wire. Crew members who had once feared Doyle now watched as his authority eroded in real time. The captain, so accustomed to command, now faced the consequences of underestimating a subordinate, of believing that rank could enforce respect without merit. Elena's mind, always tactical, considered every scenario. She knew Doyle might retaliate in some other form, perhaps through the bureaucracy of command or through subtle sabotage. She was ready. But for now, she had asserted control in the only way that mattered, by surviving, by disarming, and by standing firm without compromise. The crew began to whisper quietly, not in fear, but in awe. They had witnessed a demonstration of true courage, the ability to remain calm, precise, and lethal when necessary, without resorting to unnecessary violence. Elena Ward had claimed the moral and tactical high ground, and the lesson was indelibly etched into every eye that watched. Finally, Doyle sank to a nearby crate, his hands trembling slightly. The storm inside him had been broken, his authority fractured. Elena didn't approach him further. Her presence alone was a statement. She had proven the immutable truth of her creed. Skill, courage, and composure outweigh fear, intimidation, and arrogance. Minutes passed in tense silence. The crew exhaled collectively, realizing that the captain's reign of fear had ended. Elena lowered her stance, signaling the subtle return to order. She had faced death, intimidation, and the unpredictable nature of human ego, and she had emerged unbroken. Doyle's humiliation was total. The realization sank in slowly. He had been outmaneuvered, outclassed, and outlasted by someone he had assumed was subordinate. In that moment, he glimpsed the power of the Navy SEAL Code, the culmination of years of training, discipline, and unflinching courage. Elena took a measured breath, allowing the tension to dissipate. She had done more than survive. She had asserted a moral and tactical authority that no rank could undo. The crew would remember this night, not as a failure of command, but as a lesson in courage, resilience, and the consequences of underestimating the unflinching. As she turned toward the ship's railing, watching the waves roll beneath the moonlight, Elena knew this was only a step in a larger journey. The confrontation had ended in her favor, but the aftermath, the investigation, the exposure of misconduct, the lessons learned by the crew was only beginning. And somewhere deep in Doyle's mind, fear had been etched permanently. Fear of accountability. Fear of the unyielding. Fear of the Navy SEAL he had so foolishly threatened. The night on the USS Greyhound had changed everything. Rank could not protect arrogance. Authority could not enforce obedience in the absence of competence. And a Navy SEAL like Elena Ward had demonstrated, in the most absolute terms, why you never threaten someone trained to endure fear, to act with precision, and to survive against all odds. The morning after the confrontation, the USS Greyhound felt different. The deck, slick with leftover rain and sea spray, no longer carried the same oppressive tension. It carried a quiet awareness. Crew members moved with cautious confidence, glancing occasionally toward Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward, whose calm composure had become a symbol of stability and order. Captain Marcus Doyle, however, moved like a shadow, his every step betraying the humiliation and fear still etched into his mind. Word of the incident had reached Naval Command almost immediately. Investigators arrived within hours, their presence both reassuring and intimidating. They moved systematically through the ship, questioning crew members, inspecting logs, and reviewing communication records. Every detail of Doyle's reckless behavior and Elena's decisive response was meticulously documented. Elena briefed the investigators with the same precision she used in the field. She presented evidence of Doyle's repeated misconduct, missing weapons, unexplained supply discrepancies, and reckless mission orders that had endangered her team during the Syrian operation. She remained composed, objective, and professional, detailing facts without exaggeration, letting the evidence speak for itself. Her confidence underscored the gravity of the situation. She wasn't acting out of vengeance, but out of duty. Crew members were hesitant at first, fearing retaliation. Many had lived in fear of Doyle's temper for months, if not years. Yet, seeing Elena stand firmly, unwavering even in the face of a man wielding a shotgun, inspired courage. Slowly, one by one, they came forward, recounting their experiences. Orders ignored, threats issued, and misconduct witnessed. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle, revealing a consistent pattern of negligence, recklessness, and intimidation. Lieutenant Harris, Elena's second-in-command, provided detailed accounts of the Syrian mission. He described how Elena's foresight had saved 12 hostages while adhering to operational priorities, and how Doyle's orders, if followed, could have resulted in disaster. The clarity of these reports highlighted a stark contrast between competence and arrogance, between thoughtful leadership and reckless authority. The investigators also reviewed communications Elena had encrypted and hidden below deck. Her meticulous record-keeping had been intentional. She anticipated the need for an irrefutable paper trail. Every file, every log entry, every communication anomaly had been preserved, encrypted, and time-stamped. When decrypted, the data revealed not only Doyle's negligence, but potential misconduct in arms handling and logistical operations actions that violated naval protocols and endangered lives. Doyle tried to intervene during interviews, attempting to assert his version of events. But the evidence was undeniable, the crew's testimonies unanimous. Each statement, each document, systematically dismantled his claims. He realized, with growing panic, that he could not bully his way out of accountability. The shotgun incident, meant to intimidate Elena, had instead marked the beginning of his downfall. Throughout the investigation, Elena maintained a professional distance. She understood the delicate balance between enforcing accountability and maintaining crew cohesion. Her goal was not to humiliate Doyle further, but to ensure the safety, integrity, and morale of her team. She guided investigators calmly, pointing out inconsistencies, highlighting corroborating testimonies, and answering questions without embellishment. Her clarity and objectivity lent credibility to every statement. Investigators spent days aboard the Greyhound, cross-checking accounts, reviewing mission logs, and inspecting supplies. They examined Doyle's leadership decisions during the Syrian mission, noting how his insistence on following outdated orders had unnecessarily endangered both SEALs and hostages. The pattern of behavior, coupled with evidence of potential illicit activity, painted a stark portrait of a captain unfit to command. Meanwhile, the crew began to rebuild confidence. With Doyle's authority diminished and Elena's competence clearly established, operations proceeded with renewed focus. Elena quietly ensured that morale remained high, coaching officers and enlisted personnel, reinforcing the importance of teamwork, and reminding them that courage and discipline always outweighed fear. Her actions reinforced the lessons of the previous night. Authority alone is meaningless without integrity and competence. The investigation culminated in a formal hearing. Doyle, now visibly shaken, faced a panel of senior officers and legal representatives. His attempts to explain his actions fell flat in the face of Elena's documentation and the crew's testimonies. Every lie, every excuse, every assertion of authority was met with evidence, facts, and irrefutable accounts of his behavior. Elena did not speak at length during the hearing. When called, she presented her reports, walked the panel through the Syrian mission, highlighted discrepancies in supply chains, and detailed the chain of command failures. Her calm, measured presentation left no room for ambiguity. It was not just a defense, it was a lesson in leadership and accountability, demonstrating the stark difference between courage under fire and reckless arrogance. The panel deliberated, weighing the testimonies, the documents, and the evidence of Doyle's misconduct. The conclusion was inevitable. Doyle had violated core principles of naval leadership, endangered lives through reckless decision-making, and attempted to intimidate a subordinate unlawfully. The sentence was swift, measured, and just. Doyle was relieved of command, placed under investigation for further disciplinary actions, and formally reprimanded for misconduct. Elena's role in the proceedings, while pivotal, was understated. She had ensured justice was served without seeking personal vindication. The crew respected her not just for her courage in the field, but for her integrity in handling the aftermath. She had transformed a potentially chaotic situation into a decisive assertion of order and accountability. Once the hearing concluded, the ship felt lighter, freer. Crew members moved with a sense of restored agency, no longer fearful of arbitrary threats. Elena walked the deck, observing the subtle changes. Officers who had once flinched now carried themselves with quiet confidence. Enlisted personnel who had hesitated now engaged openly in operations. The Greyhound was no longer a vessel of fear. It was a ship restored to its intended purpose: teamwork, discipline, and mission readiness. In private, Elena reflected on the events that had brought them to this point. The Syrian mission, Doyle's threats, the shotgun confrontation, and the investigation had tested every aspect of her leadership and judgment. She had faced life-or-death situations, navigated internal corruption, and emerged not just intact but stronger. The lessons were clear. Vigilance, preparation, and moral courage were as critical as physical skill in maintaining order and protecting lives. By the end of the investigation, Doyle's fate was sealed. He would be remembered not for his rank or authority, but for the failure to recognize competence and the consequences of arrogance. Elena Ward, by contrast, had cemented her reputation as a leader who could face impossible odds, enforce accountability, and inspire loyalty, not through fear, but through integrity and action. The crew knew the story would follow them beyond the deck of the Greyhound. They had witnessed a display of courage, skill, and principle that would shape the culture of the ship for years to come. And while the investigation had resolved immediate threats, the impact of the events would ripple through every officer and sailor who served aboard the vessel. Elena, quietly, continued her work. She ensured operational readiness, mentored junior officers, and maintained focus on the mission at hand. Her actions demonstrated a fundamental truth she had always known. Leadership was not about rank, weapons, or threats. It was about protecting lives, enforcing integrity, and making the difficult decisions that others could not. By the time the Greyhound sailed into calmer waters, the investigation was complete. Doyle had been removed, and the ship had begun a slow but steady return to normalcy. The crew, once trapped in fear, now moved with a sense of purpose and renewed respect for the woman who had guided them through chaos. Elena Ward, ever vigilant, remained a quiet force on the deck, a symbol of courage, integrity, and the unflinching resolve of a true Navy SEAL. The USS Greyhound had regained its rhythm, the hum of machinery and footsteps, a familiar soundtrack for the crew. Yet beneath the surface, the events of the past weeks lingered like a quiet pulse, memories of tension, fear, courage, and accountability intertwined in every corner of the ship. The removal of Captain Doyle had brought relief, but it also left a space that demanded reflection and vigilance. Leadership had changed, but the lessons endured. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward became more than a respected officer. She became a symbol. Her actions, from the Syrian mission to the shotgun confrontation and the meticulous investigation that followed, had resonated deeply within the crew. They spoke quietly among themselves about her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering calm in the face of threats that could have shattered anyone less trained. Elena had set a new standard, demonstrating that leadership was not about rank, intimidation, or fear. It was about responsibility, skill, and moral integrity. The Navy recognized her contributions officially. Awards were processed, commendations sent up the chain, and her achievements began to ripple beyond the deck of the Greyhound. Yet Elena was never one for the spotlight. She accepted recognition with humility, preferring the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed and lives saved over public acclaim. To her, honor was earned through action, not ceremony. Despite her modesty, the story of her courage began to circulate. Crews on other ships whispered about the woman who had faced a captain with a shotgun pressed to her head and survived, disarmed, and held him accountable. Junior officers sought her mentorship. Enlisted personnel listened more intently, and even senior commanders reached out to understand the method and discipline behind her actions. Elena's influence extended quietly, reshaping how leadership, courage, and accountability were perceived across the fleet. Back aboard the Greyhound, the crew continued operations with renewed morale. Officers who had once flinched at Doyle's commands now executed tasks with confidence, inspired by Elena's example. She conducted training exercises, emphasizing decision-making under pressure, situational awareness, and moral courage. Each drill, each lesson, carried echoes of the past events, ensuring the lessons were not forgotten. In quiet moments, Elena reflected on the incident and its broader implications. Leadership was more than issuing orders. It was about protecting lives, assessing risk accurately, and making difficult choices when the stakes were highest. Courage was not merely the absence of fear, but the disciplined response to it, guided by reason, skill, and moral clarity. She thought about Doyle, now removed from command, and the path he had chosen, the arrogance, the disregard for protocol, the belief that fear could enforce loyalty. His downfall had been inevitable, yet it served as a stark reminder to the Navy. Unchecked pride can endanger not only individuals, but entire missions. The crew noticed a subtle shift in Elena as well. While her exterior remained composed, there was a quiet weight in her demeanor, a reflection of the responsibilities she bore. She had faced death, intimidation, and corruption, and survived not by chance, but by discipline, skill, and unwavering moral focus. Yet she knew that the Navy would always demand vigilance. Challenges would arise, threats would emerge, and her ability to lead would be tested again. In the following weeks, the Navy issued formal commendations. Elena received the Navy and Marine Corps' Commendation Medal for her leadership during the Syrian mission, a medal that symbolized courage, precision, and responsibility under fire. Senior officers highlighted her ability to navigate complex situations, her foresight in critical missions, and her ethical leadership. The recognition was well earned, yet Elena received it without fanfare, quietly ensuring the crew felt the credit as much as she did. Her impact on Navy culture was subtle but profound. The story of the Greyhound's crisis, the confrontation with Doyle, and the subsequent investigation became a case study in leadership, courage, and moral accountability. Officers across the fleet studied the events, learning from the meticulous records, the crew testimonies, and Elena's exemplary conduct. She had not sought fame, but her actions set a precedent that would influence Navy leadership for years to come. Elena also devoted time to mentoring junior officers, particularly women seeking to advance in a field historically dominated by men. She shared insights into decision-making under pressure, strategies for earning respect without intimidation, and lessons from facing threats both in combat and from authority figures. Her guidance was practical, grounded in experience, and underscored by the fundamental principle that integrity and competence always outweigh fear and ego. The crew of the Greyhound continued to reflect on the incident in quieter, more personal ways. Soldiers shared stories in mess halls and barracks about the night the captain had threatened Elena, and how she had stood unwavering, turning fear into a lesson in courage. They drew inspiration from her actions, understanding that true leadership required resilience, foresight, and moral clarity, not just rank or authority. Elena herself remained focused on operational excellence. She led drills, coordinated missions, and ensured the ship maintained peak readiness. Yet in her heart, she carried the memory of the shotgun incident as a reminder. Leadership demanded constant vigilance. Courage was tested in moments of extreme pressure, and integrity was the foundation of trust. She knew that her actions had changed the course of her ship, the lives of her crew, and the understanding of leadership itself. Occasionally, she would walk the deck at night, gazing at the horizon where the sky met the sea. The waves reflected moonlight, silver and steady, mirroring the balance she had sought to restore aboard the ship. She thought of those she had saved, of the crew who now trusted her implicitly, and of the responsibilities that still lay ahead. Her journey was far from over. Challenges would always arise, yet she knew the lessons learned would serve as her compass. The echoes of honor her own, and that of her team, reverberated through the Greyhound. The crew moved with renewed confidence, carrying forward the principles Elena had exemplified: courage under pressure, accountability in leadership, and the unwavering commitment to protect lives above all else. Elena Ward had not only survived a direct threat to her life, but had reshaped the culture of her ship, inspiring loyalty, competence, and courage in every member. By the time the Greyhound returned to port, the story had begun to circulate beyond the Navy. Media outlets, aware of the unusual events, hinted at a confrontation between rank and courage. Yet Elena remained private, choosing to let the story highlight principles and lessons rather than personal glory. Her focus was, as always, on the mission, her crew, and the enduring legacy of leadership that truly protected lives. In the quiet moments of reflection, Elena understood something fundamental. True honor is measured not by medals, recognition, or rank, but by the courage to act decisively, the wisdom to act ethically, and the ability to inspire others to do the same. The echoes of that night, the lessons learned, and the lives protected would continue to resonate far beyond the USS Greyhound, shaping not just Navy culture, but the understanding of what it truly means to lead. Elena Ward had faced fear, authority, and chaos, and she had emerged not only unbroken, but stronger. Her story would be remembered, not for the confrontation itself, but for the principles it illuminated: courage, integrity, and the unyielding resolve of a Navy SEAL. Months had passed since the confrontation that had reshaped the course of the USS Greyhound. The crew moved with confidence now, their operations executed with precision and coordination, a testament to the lessons learned through tension, fear, and the courage of a single officer. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward had become more than a leader. She had become a standard of excellence, an embodiment of the Navy's highest ideals. The ship's atmosphere had changed in subtle but profound ways. Where once fear had dictated decisions, now trust, competence, and accountability guided every action. Officers held themselves to higher standards. Junior enlisted personnel felt empowered to act decisively, and the crew as a whole understood the importance of moral courage alongside physical skill. The memory of the night with Doyle and the shotgun was no longer a moment of terror. It had become a story of survival, strategy, and integrity that inspired everyone aboard. Elena continued to lead with the same calm precision that had defined her from the start. She oversaw training exercises, mission planning, and operational readiness, always emphasizing foresight and ethical decision-making. Her mentorship extended beyond her immediate team. Officers from other ships and units sought her guidance, wanting to learn how to command with both authority and respect. She shared her experiences carefully, highlighting the principles behind her actions rather than the drama of the confrontation itself. Despite the recognition and respect she received, Elena remained remarkably humble. She declined interviews and accolades that emphasized personal glory, instead crediting her team and the Navy as a whole. She understood that her strength lay not only in her skills, but in the collective trust and competence of her crew. She had faced impossible odds and survived, yes, but the true victory had been the preservation of lives, the reinforcement of duty, and the restoration of ethical command. The Navy, taking note of the incident and its outcomes, incorporated aspects of Elena's handling of the situation into leadership training programs. Case studies highlighted the importance of decision-making under pressure, ethical accountability, and the consequences of unchecked authority. Officers were taught to recognize arrogance and incompetence, to value moral courage, and to empower subordinates to act responsibly. Elena's actions had reshaped training philosophy, leaving a lasting imprint on Navy culture. Crew members, too, carried forward the lessons in their daily work. Elena's calm decisiveness inspired confidence. Her integrity encouraged accountability. Her courage in the face of a direct threat became a quiet benchmark for personal conduct. Even years later, sailors who had served on the Greyhound would recall the night of confrontation, not as a moment of fear, but as a defining lesson in leadership and resilience. For Elena, the legacy was personal as well. She often reflected on the choices she had made, the decisions to deviate from reckless orders, to meticulously document misconduct, to face a direct threat without hesitation. Each choice had carried risk, yet each had been guided by principle. She understood that leadership demanded not only skill, but moral clarity, not only courage, but foresight. Her survival and success had been a combination of training, judgment, and ethical commitment. Off-duty, she engaged in quiet routines that reinforced her mental and physical readiness. Early morning swims in the ship's pool, careful review of mission logs, and tactical drills maintained her sharpness. These routines were more than habit. They were discipline, a reflection of the Navy SEAL ethos she embodied. They reminded her that courage was not a one-time act, but a continuous commitment, tested in moments of chaos and calm alike. The crew's morale reached a level of cohesion rarely seen on any ship. Officers and enlisted personnel spoke openly, offered ideas, and executed missions with confidence, knowing their decisions were valued and their actions supported. The culture of fear that Doyle had cultivated was replaced by mutual respect, operational excellence, and shared responsibility. Elena's influence permeated every corner of the ship, quietly but decisively. Doyle, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale within the Navy. His failure to recognize competence, reliance on intimidation, and reckless decision-making were cited in training materials, internal reports, and leadership workshops. He had underestimated Elena Ward, and the consequences had been severe. The story of a captain threatened by his own subordinate became an enduring lesson in accountability and the limits of authority. Elena's story also inspired those outside the Navy, women and men pursuing careers in military service. Law enforcement and other high-pressure fields cited her example as proof that skill, courage, and integrity could overcome arrogance and fear. She became a quiet icon, not because she sought recognition, but because her actions resonated universally. The principles she lived by: preparedness, decisiveness, ethical clarity applied in every context where leadership and human lives intersected. Years later, Elena would reflect on the night of the shotgun confrontation as a turning point. It had tested her physical abilities, her judgment, and her moral compass. It had tested her patience, strategy, and resilience. Yet the confrontation had also validated the training, discipline, and ethical framework that guided every SEAL in the Navy. She had not only survived, but had reinforced the values that ensured the safety and effectiveness of her team. The USS Greyhound, restored to operational excellence, sailed on with a crew transformed by experience. Every officer and sailor carried lessons of courage, trust, and accountability, ensuring that the principles Elena embodied were passed forward. Her impact extended far beyond the ship's deck, influencing the broader Navy culture and shaping the understanding of leadership in extreme circumstances. Elena Ward's legacy was not built on medals or accolades, but on the quiet, persistent demonstration of principle under pressure. She had faced death, intimidation, and arrogance, and emerged stronger, not for personal glory, but to protect lives, uphold ethical command, and inspire others to rise to their best selves. Her story, whispered among sailors and shared in training, became a touchstone for courage, integrity, and the enduring power of a Navy SEAL's discipline. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the waves gold and silver, Elena stood on the deck of the Greyhound, watching the future unfold. The ship moved steadily through calm waters, a symbol of restored order, of lessons learned, and of the quiet, unwavering strength that had guided them through chaos. She understood that leadership was a journey, not a moment. Courage was a practice, not a single act. And in that moment, Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward knew her legacy was secure, not because of fear overcome, not because of authority challenged, but because she had lived and acted by the principles that defined a true Navy SEAL: courage, integrity, and unflinching resolve in the face of danger. The USS Greyhound carried these echoes forward, and so did every life she had touched, every lesson she had taught, and every mission she had completed. Her story, a testament to human courage and moral clarity, would endure far beyond the decks of the Greyhound, a reminder that leadership grounded in principle is stronger than fear, and that true courage inspires not only survival, but excellence.